Christmas is a time of warmth, celebration, and togetherness. Across the world, it marks an occasion where families gather to share joy, reflect on the year gone by, and make new memories. The holiday season, filled with traditions like gift-giving, festive meals, and reconnecting with loved ones, embodies the values of peace and goodwill. However, in 2008, one family's Christmas celebrations would be tragically marked by unspeakable horror. On Christmas Eve that year, the Ortega family in Covina, California, became the victims of one of the deadliest mass murders in recent history. What was once a night of celebration turned into a nightmare when a man dressed as Santa Claus carried out a meticulously planned attack that left 9 people dead. The Ortega family was well known in Covina, a suburban city about 22 miles east of Los Angeles. Joseph and Alicia Ortega, who had been married for 53 years, were the backbone of a close-knit and loving family that regularly came together to celebrate Christmas in their family home. Papa Joe and Alice, as they were affectionately known, had 5 children together: Sylvia, James, Charles, Letitia, and Alicia. Their Christmas Eve celebrations were a cherished tradition, where the family would gather with extended relatives, in-laws, and children to share the holiday spirit. The Ortega family had built a life of success, stability, and warmth. Joseph and Alicia were immigrants who had worked hard to achieve the American dream, opening a successful paint shop on Virginia Avenue in Baldwin Park. Over the years, the family grew, with the Ortega children getting married and having families of their own. Christmas Eve 2008 was no exception to their long-standing tradition. More than 25 family members gathered at the Ortega household on Knollcrest Drive, including Joseph, Alicia, their children, grandchildren, and some close friends. Little did they know, the festive gathering would soon be shattered by an act of unimaginable violence. On the night of December 24th, 2008, the Ortegas spent the night enjoying a festive dinner together before spending the evening playing Texas Hold'em poker, hanging out near the pool in the backyard, and playing video games. Everyone was enjoying themselves before the Christmas festivities scheduled for the following day. At approximately 11:27 p.m, when everyone was turning in for the night, there was a knock at the Ortega's door. When 8-year-old Katrina Yusufpolsky, Joseph and Alicia's granddaughter, excited by the prospect of Santa's arrival, opened the door, she was met not with the joy of Christmas, but the terror of a masked assailant. The unassuming man, dressed in a Santa Claus outfit, stood in the doorway, holding a large gift-wrapped package, which actually contained a rolling air compressor converted to spray racing fuel. Without warning, the man shot the young girl in the face with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, wounding her. Miraculously, she survived, though was extremely traumatized, and her life was forever changed by the physical and emotional scars she bore. The man shot and injured several others in the household, including Katrina's uncles, Charles and James, who, despite being severely injured, tried to restrain the perpetrator. The injuries caused by the bullets varied in severity, with one having a minor bullet graze to the cheek, another teenager being shot in the back. What followed was a meticulously planned massacre. The Killer Santa, as dubbed by the media, armed with 4 semi-automatic handguns and carrying a homemade flamethrower, stormed into the house, opening fire at the Ortega family members, several taking cover under the dining table. He shot at those in his path, indiscriminately killing 9 individuals, including 43-year-old Sylvia Ortega Pardo, her parents 80-year-old Joseph and 70-year-old Alicia Ortega, and 3 of Sylvia's siblings and their spouses, Charles Ortega and his wife Cherry, James and his wife Teresa, Alicia Ortega Ortiz, and her 17-year-old son, Michael Ortiz. The entire attack lasted only minutes, but in that brief time, the perpetrator managed to shatter the lives of many, leaving a trail of death and devastation in tow. 3 of the victims died from gunshot wounds, whilst 4 others died due to a combination of their gunshot wounds and the fire that ensued. 2 died in the fire alone. A total of 13 young people were left orphaned that night. After gunning down his victims, the man unwrapped the package he had brought with him, revealing the homemade flamethrower. He used the device to spray gasoline throughout the house, igniting a fire that quickly engulfed the residents, though it was later believed his intentions were to light the fire with a flare, but an explosion occurred when fuel met flame, the vapour possibly ignited by a candle or pilot light. The fire spread rapidly, consuming the house and destroying any evidence of the massacre. Several bodies were burned beyond recognition, and it took hours for firefighters to extinguish the inferno. While using the flamethrower, the man accidentally set himself on fire, suffering third-degree burns to his hands and arms, with some of the Santa suit actually melting onto his skin. Severely injured and in extreme pain, he removed his Santa outfit and fled 40 miles to his brother's empty house in his blue Dodge Caliber rental vehicle, where he then forced entry into his brother's property and was later found deceased by him early the next morning at around 3:10 a.m. with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head and oddly $17,000 attached to his legs with plastic wrap and in a girdle. Bruce Jeffrey Pardo, Sylvia Ortega's ex-husband, was quickly identified as the perpetrator by police after one of the surviving family members raised the alarm at a neighbour's house and identified him to dispatchers on the phone as the suspect. Pardo was a 45-year-old electrical engineer whose life had taken a series of downward turns leading up to the attack. In the years before the massacre, Pardo had married Sylvia Ortega in January of 2006. By this time, Sylvia, who was an admin assistant at a florist, had 3 children from 2 previous marriages. However, her latest marriage was fraught with difficulties almost from the beginning. Pardo had kept many secrets from Sylvia, including hiding a son from a previous relationship and severe financial troubles. He refused to open a joint bank account with Sylvia and expected her to use her own finances for the upkeep of their children, refusing to provide child support for his other child, who had actually suffered from brain damage as a youngster after falling into a backyard swimming pool in 2001 whilst Pardo was watching television. He claimed his son as a tax reduction, but did not financially support him or his mother, who was his primary caregiver. Pardo was known to have a gambling problem and had accumulated significant debts. His dishonesty and irresponsible behaviour strained his marriage, and by early 2008, Sylvia filed for divorce. The divorce itself was actually finalised just 1 week before the massacre on December 18th. The settlement was costly for Pardo. He was ordered to pay Sylvia $10,000 as part of the divorce settlement and $1.8k per month in spousal support. He also lost access to his family home and the couple's dog, an Akita named Saki, and Sylvia was allowed to keep her expensive wedding ring. His finances were in a state of disarray, with his spousal support checks bouncing, despite earning almost 4 times what his wife earned per annum. He had recently lost his job at ITT Electronic Systems, a military defence supplier, after falsifying work hours on his timesheets. He applied for unemployment benefits after being denied a severance package from his previous employer, however was rejected due to the nature of his dismissal. Pardo had spiralled into a state of anger and depression, fueled by the bitterness he felt towards Sylvia and her family. He complained to the courts that Sylvia was living with her parents, not paying rent, and had spent lavishly on a luxury car, gambling trips to Las Vegas, fine dining, massages, and golf lessons, but whether there was any truth to these claims remain unclear. Many believe these claims were made purely out of spite or bitterness regarding the divorce. It was clear that Pardo had been planning the massacre for weeks, if not months, leading up to Christmas Eve. He had purchased the firearms, the materials to construct the flamethrower, and even rented a getaway car in preparation for his final act of vengeance. Due to Californian law, he could only purchase one concealable firearms every 30 days, and leading up to the crime, he did just that when purchasing the 5 handguns which were used in the massacre. Pardo's plan was coldly methodical. In addition to killing his ex-wife and her family, he intended to flee the scene and possibly even flee the country, specifically having bought a plane ticket with either Northwest Airlines or Air Canada, sources conflict, which was found in his shoe. He had booked a plane ticket on Christmas morning from Los Angeles to Moline, Illinois, or, again, to Canada, sources differ, and had called an old school friend and had arranged to visit them, though investigators later believed this to be some sort of ploy. He had parked his rental car near his brother's house in Sylmar, about 30 miles from Covina, filled with ammunition, maps, and cash, with another rental, a Toyota, being parked near his ex-wife's divorce attorney, also packed full of supplies, including maps of the Southwest and Mexico. His rental vehicle held remnants of his made-to-measure Santa suit, which he had purchased from a local costume store, however was set as a trap to go on fire if it was moved, likely by a tripwire or switch, and would trigger a flare and start a fire from gunpowder, with 200 rounds of ammunition present in the vehicle. Luckily, the incendiary device was disarmed by the local bomb squad, and nobody else was hurt. However, his plan began to unravel during the massacre, and subsequently resulted in Pardo taking his own life. His home in Montrose, Los Angeles, was later searched by police, where they found a virtual makeshift bomb factory, 5 empty boxes for semi-automatic handguns, 2 shotguns, and a container for high-octane fuel tank gasoline. The aftermath of the massacre left the Ortega family and the Covina community in shock. 9 members of the same family had been brutally murdered. The once festive family home had been reduced to ashes, and the surviving members were left to grapple with the enormity of their loss. Chapa Ortega, one of the adult Ortega children's cousins, said of Pardo, quote, a monster. That man was a monster. He killed good, hard-working people who had many friends and who loved the United States. Authorities were quick to launch an investigation into the events of that night. It became clear that Pardo had acted out of a sense of deep-seated resentment and anger towards Sylvia and her family. The massacre was the culmination of his rage and desire for revenge over his failed marriage and financial struggles. Pardo's elaborate preparations, including his disguise, arsenal of weapons, and the homemade flamethrower, pointed to premeditation and a calculated intent to destroy the Ortega family. The fire that Pardo started destroyed much of the evidence, and many of the victims were charred beyond recognition. Dental records were needed to identify the remains of the deceased. In the days following the massacre, news of the horrific crime spread across the nation, leaving people stunned by the sheer brutality of Pardo's actions. He did not have a criminal record or a history of violence, and many people who knew him described him as a friendly man, who often ushered at church and was seen walking his dog often. But newspapers cite how in his younger days, Pardo adored being the centre of attention, even bringing a life-sized inflatable doll to his college graduation. He came and went as he pleased, and even left one of his girlfriends at the altar on their wedding day, stealing $3,000 of her savings to go on a solo vacation to Palm Springs. Quote, "He was very, very intelligent, but common sense lacking." This was very apparent when another ex-girlfriend fell overboard from a boat on Lake Havasu and nearly drowned, with Pardo laughing, appearing not to grasp the severity of the situation. Following the Covina massacre, it also came to light that Pardo had been planning on killing his own mother, as she sympathized with Sylvia during their divorce proceedings. In the face of such profound loss, the Covina community rallied around the Ortega family. The city held vigils and memorial services to honour the victims and support the surviving family members. Reportedly, every Christmas Eve since the massacre, the community has come together to remember the lives lost and to provide solace for those still grieving. What was once a time of celebration became a period of reflection and mourning for the entire city. The survivors of the Ortega family were left devastated by the loss of their loved ones. Leticia Ortega, Sylvia's sister, was one of the few survivors. She managed to escape with her daughter by jumping out of a second-story window after the shooting began. However, she lost many beloved family members that night. The psychological trauma of that night left lasting scars on the survivors, many of whom struggled with the emotional aftermath of the massacre for years to come. Despite the overwhelming tragedy, survivors of the Ortega family have worked to find ways to heal and honour the memories of those they lost. Leticia, in particular, became an advocate for gun violence prevention. In 2018, she joined survivors of other mass shootings and student activists in protests against gun violence in Pasadena. Her story and the stories of other survivors became powerful symbols of resilience and the need for action to prevent future tragedies. The survivors' advocacy work brought attention to the issues of gun control and domestic violence as they shared their personal experiences to raise awareness and push for change. Their courage in the face of such unimaginable loss has been an inspiration to many, showing that even in the darkest of times, there can be hope and a path forward. More than 1,500 people attended the funerals of the Ortega family at Holy Name of Mary Catholic Church in San Dimas, followed by private burials at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in their hometown of Covina. Their deaths stand as one of the most tragic and devastating mass murders in recent US history. What began as a joyful Christmas Eve celebration ended in horror as Bruce Pardo's calculated and vengeful attack took the lives of 9 family members. The crime left the surviving family members of the Ortega family and the Covina community reeling from the shock and grief of such an unimaginable loss. Yet, in the aftermath of the massacre, the resilience of the survivors and the strength of the community have shone through.